Okay, let's talk about the French election results. We have the results. In France, there's 2 rounds of voting. So if some of you guys are like, wait, wasn't there like French elections just a little bit ago? Yes, there was a parliamentary, there was a European election. Therefore, they're voting for MPs to represent France in the European Parliament. And then after the result showed that the French far right, the National Rally Alliance, the RN, it used to be referred to as, I believe, France Nationale, if I remember correctly, but they changed their name because it was no bueno when it comes to attracting moderates. They changed their name. They changed their image away from Marie Le Pen's father and the extreme French far right. When we're talking about like the racial aspects and stuff like that, moderated themselves slightly. And Marie Le Pen has been very active in that endeavor. And they then ran and did very well in the European elections for parliament. And so that led to them saying, hey guys, let's have a parliamentary election for France's parliament right now. And then Macron said, okay. And everybody went crazy. If you were watching social media the hours after Macron said, let's have the election now, it was mass panic. It was mass panic. People thought that Macron had just signed the death warrant. Why, in the fallout of the French far right having their best results, would you immediately call for an election? We just saw Rishi Sunak call for an election at a very, very bad time, leading to devastating losses for the Conservatives. Are we going to see Macron's version of that? And instead of electing Keir Starmer in a Labour government, will we now be seeing Marie Le Pen's government going into power? And this is the panic people had. Now, this was not just some Hail Mary toss-up with no thought put into it, because there's a few ways of thinking about it. Even though Macron is famously not super open about all of his strategies to the press and has even mocked the press for it. I think, what did he say? Like, my thoughts are too complicated for journalists. But there's a few ways you could look about it. The first way you could look about it is that he believes that after the first round of results and the far right doing well, that if he calls another round and he makes it a referendum not on the policies of his government and the unpopular pension plans and like the changing of the retirement age, with France having one of the lowest retirement ages in Europe, from moving up from 62 to 64, or any of the other policies that have been not too popular when it comes to economic issues or how the unions like them, or any of the immigration issues, which is something that's a big motivator for the National Rally. And less Republicans, which is like a less radical but also conservative bloc in France. Instead of concentrating on that, it's a referendum on Marie Le Pen. It's a referendum on the Putinists. It's a referendum on their history and legacy of the far right, and France's everyday man standing up against the far right ideologues. And once it's the referendum about that, instead of specifically Macron's policies and how his prime minister's doing and et cetera, then he has a much better chance. Think about like how there's a lot of people who will vote for the Democrats, not necessarily because they even agree with them on literally everything. There are Republicans who are voting for Joe Biden. What they'll say is, well, I mean, we just can't have Trump. Having that type of anti-Trump vote, instead, it would just be anti-Le Pen. And so thinking that the left and the center would unite against the right, that's one strategy, which, I mean, here, when we look at the results, New Popular Front, that's the coalition of left-wing parties that make up France Unbound, the Socialist Party, and a bunch of different they coalesced together, and they became the real upset, the largest party in the French Parliament. And then after that, it was Macron's centrist party, and then National Rally. And we're going to get into the specifics of how they achieved this in a moment. But the other strategy that Macron could have had is, well, let's say this goes wrong. Well, then you're going to have a government of cohabitation. This isn't the result we got, so don't worry about this being right now, but just an idea of French politics. In a government of cohabitation, that means that the parliament no longer stands with who is the president of the country, who is Emmanuel Macron. And therefore, you're going to have a prime minister who does not stand with the president of the country. I believe Gabriel Attal was the last one, and now he's left and he's going to be replaced with someone else after the left and the center debates and negotiates some compromise prime minister. But a government of cohabitation would mean that the national rally get to choose who the prime minister is, and then Macron stays the president until the next election in, I think, 2027. And the idea would be, and this is historically played out, that cohabitation governments are not popular, because then the boost you can be by being the opposition, by pointing at Macron and saying, bad thing happened in France, it's his fault. Bad policy, his fault. Oh, the moving up of retiring age. He did that because he hates workers and yada yada. And I agree with a lot of the left's critiques of Macron. But once you're national rally and you have to be the one to go up there and look at France's economic decision and make hard choices, or you're the one who now the current state of affairs is placed upon your shoulders, and then a vote on you becomes a vote on the status quo, that can hurt your government. And then come 2027, when the next election comes around for president, Marie Le Pen runs, and she can no longer run as just the opposition. She has to run on the record of 3 years of cohabitation government. And they can say, well, you know, Macron's party still tripped us up, or Macron tripped us up, or this and that and this and that. But a lot of it's going to look slimy and like it's dodging. And so therefore, even in the worst case scenario, Macron could still have the consolation prize of being, well, at least in 3 years, they won't be able to run as the opposition. They'll have to run on the status quo that they themselves has produced. And when you're talking about the national rally, this will be the first time they have ever governed the country, if they did get that cohabitation government. And so there could be a lot of problems that come with that. If they show themselves to be inexperienced, foolish, and unable to, engage in statecraft, then that could hurt them. So that's some of the strategy that went into it. There's other stuff, but we have the results, so I don't want to talk all this about strategy. So how did the left in the center beat the right? Even though, if you look here, the right got a big boost of 53 seats, and they got a very large total percentage of the vote in 37.1%, which is larger than both Macron's faction and the Center Alliance. How did they end up winning in this electoral system? Well, what the left did, the NFP, is first they made a coalition. Smart. Coalesce the left. Don't have them running as different parties. That was already smart. When you have an insurgent far-right threat, generally speaking, the best thing the left can always do is unite. Staying divided is one of the first things that the left does if it wants to fail. If you have to unite, you've got to find a way to coalesce and then work with other parties who are in opposition to the right. In this instance, it was the Ensemble. It was France's centrist Macron party. And they came together after the first round and they said, we are going to have our candidates drop out in areas where we're competing against each other. And so in the second round, if there was like an Ensemble candidate that was only going to get 20% of the vote, but a new Popular Front candidate that was going to get 30%, the Ensemble candidate drops out. And then those voters will then vote strategically against who the national rally would put forward. Now, that won't be the case in every example with the Ensemble people, because there are some centrists that are going to be like, I hate the left so much, I'm not going to do that. But largely speaking, this strategy seems to have paid off. And both of them, by dropping out strategically, not challenging each other's candidates in the second round, and just concentrating on the mandate of, we don't want Le Pen, we do not want the national rally leading the country, they were able to stop them from rising, and not even stop them from becoming the most popular party, but stop them from becoming, the party with the most seats. They stopped them from becoming the second party with the most seats. They're in the third place. Now, this is still a big victory for National Rally in other ways. I mean, they still gained 53 seats. This is still the most seats they have ever had in the French Parliament. But what the polls were saying before is that they might just take it out altogether outright. But scandal after scandal, coalition building, the center and the left uniting, them working together and coordinating on these votes, allowed them to be able to build a strategy to help stem the tide, as well as the national rally underperforming what many of the polls said they would perform. So that is how the French left and the center was able to coast to victory. Now, to be clear, this is still a concerning result when it comes to the amount of support National Rally got. And also there are other factors involved, but that's the simple bare bones of it. Now, the Kremlin, since I know a lot of you guys are big supporters of Ukraine, and many of you are probably also monitoring this as a foreigner and you're interested, well, I mean, I doubt many French people need to watch my videos. Morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Bop and Wap, thank you so much for the gifted tier 1 sub. I appreciate that. I doubt many French people need to watch my video on the French election to get a breakdown. So as a foreigner, what does this mean for foreign policy? Morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Bop and Wap, thank you for another tier 1 gifted sub. I appreciate that, buddy. So what does this mean for foreign policy? Well, first off, let's start with our favorite group of people, the Russian government. They're not too happy. They're moping about it. They are not excited. Let's read a little bit from Politico about how the Russian government has responded, specifically Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. France's far-right national rally, which has been criticized for its Russian-friendly positions, was unexpectedly trounced at the second round of poll on Sunday. Also, if you guys are interested, like, what do you mean Russian-friendly position? The national rally was against the use of French long-range munitions to hit Russian, for example, air bases, or even to hit inside Russia at all. They were against really any discussion of sending troops over to Ukraine. They're a big fan of like de-intensifying the support for Ukraine. They said they support Ukraine broadly speaking, but every time it came to like making the crucial decisions that the Ukrainians say that they either need to win or that Macron has gone further than them, they have chickened out. And this has also made a lot of people, to combine that with their history of Putinist rhetoric and pro-Putin talking points, to make them think that they would serve trying to end the war on terms that are favorable to Russia before trying to put in the effort to help Ukraine win a long-term peace. And plus, if you look Marie Le Pen Putin, if you look her up, there's also a big scandal right now of their party getting a lot of financing from the Russians. I mean, they've had meetings before. I remember, was she the one with the shirt, or was that the Italian politician with the shirt of Putin? I think it was the Italian politician. Point is, though, they are critiqued quite a lot for this. And the Russians, before the election, were saying, like, hey, guys, if these guys win, we can negotiate peace. Now, they didn't say that bluntly or, like, directly, but that was the point they were getting at. Let me read this to you, their statement. The victory of political forces that would be supporters of efforts to restore our bilateral relations is definitely better for Russia, but so far we do not see such a bright political will in anyone, and so we do not harbor any special hopes or illusion in this regard, he said Monday. Peskov, that is. Peskov added that the mood of French voters were unpredictable and that Moscow would watch the formation of the government and the formation of blocs with great interest. France is a very important country on the European continent, so of course, everything that happens there is of interest to us. The Kremlin had earlier cheered Marie Le Pen's national rally, with its foreign ministry writing in a social media post last week that French voters are, and I quote, seeking a sovereign foreign policy that serves their national interests and break from the dictate of Washington and Brussels, accompanied by a photo of the party's leader, Marie Le Pen. So this is the Russian government itself, like, directly championing them for president, them for not only Marie Le Pen to be president of the country eventually in 2027, but for them to win the election. National Rally has proposed deepening ties with Moscow, opposed sanctions on Russia in response to the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, and took out a $9 million euro loan from a Russian bank to help finance its campaign in 2014, which it only finished paying back last year. Now, enough of the National Rally stuff, though. Let's talk about Melson. So Melson is the leader of France Unbowed, which is the largest party making up the coalition in the French left of the NFP. I believe France Unbowed won something like, 77 seats, something along those lines. 77 seats, something like 80 seats, something along those lines. Point is, though, of the NFP, they were able to get the most seats. And Mélenchon has been a big image on the French left for quite a while. He's been around for a while, with many people even saying that he has a little bit of a cult of personality on the left in France. Now, Mélenchon also has a history, and putting aside all of like, I mean, we could go into all of his like, I don't want to get too in depth here, so I just want to concentrate on the issue that I know that me and my audience cares about, and that is Ukraine. Mélenchon has a history of making statements very sympathetic to the Russian government and statements against supporting Ukraine. Not only during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has he been tepidly in support of Ukraine, he has been somebody that has been trying to tamper down French support for Ukraine. And I'm not saying he's the first one to say stop any Ukrainians, yada yada, but he is someone who's been very tepid when it comes to supporting Ukraine and holding back and advocating for policies that are not too strong on the Russians. But I mean, besides that, he also has a history of just pushing Putinist talking points. Listen to this. This is from back in 2014. Mélenchon denounces new adventurous putschist power in Kiev. The leader of the left party, Mélenchon, said on Saturday that it was absolutely predictable that Russia would take quote-unquote protective measures in Crimea against the new Ukrainian government, which he described as putschist, which means like they overthrew the government. Asked on the sidelines of a demonstration against the Responsibility Pact, Mr. Mélenchon declared, one second, let's put it back in English, please. The ports of Crimea are vital for the security of Russia. It is absolutely predictable that the Russians will not let this happen. They are taking protective measures against an adventurous putschist power in which the neo-Nazis have completely detestable influence. France is deeply concerned by the incoming, the information coming from Crimea, which, oh, wait, never mind. This is like a different French politician. Okay, so Mélenchon put the idea out there that, number one, this is completely reasonable for the Russians to invade Crimea. Now, mind you, like Muslim Tatar activists were like killed and their bodies were thrown in rivers and only found by their family members later bloated down the river. They arrested tons of people. Hundreds of thousands were displaced from Crimea and left in fear of Russian occupation. The invasion of Crimea also was followed by an invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk. The Russians, the entire time they were doing it, were lying about it. So maybe Mélenchon thinks it's based and cool, but the Russians, while they were doing it, couldn't even admit to it because they knew that if they were admitting, yes, we're invading a sovereign nation that we specifically said after we asked for them to give up their nukes in the 90s that we wouldn't, it would not be a good look. But also, like, what is this idea that the Russians just get forever access to the Crimean port? Is that really the belief that we all have? That Russia, because it wants a warm water port in Crimea, gets a warm water port in Crimea, because that's just how it works. If that is the case, and that is how it just works, then, like, could we invade Japan because they didn't give us a base in Okinawa because we believe that Pacific trade interests are of extreme concern to the United States? Like, even if, and this is how we would have to, this is what we'd have to do to make it comparable, even if the Japanese said we could have a base there anyway, because once the Ukrainian government was overthrown, after 100 protesters were murdered, I wonder if 100 France Unbound supporters were murdered in the street by Macron, after Macron hired gangs, literal gangs, to go beat them up and provoke stuff. I wonder how, like, if like he would be like, oh, well, you know, if we go any further, this is putschist. You know, this is, I mean, they might be about to outlaw protesting itself, but I mean, let's all be reasonable here. The same guy calling for like economic revolution and the rebuilding of the French state and 90% taxes. But then when it comes to protesters' rights, oh, never mind. We're just too Russophilic for that. Come on. Come on. The idea of the Russians get like a permanent port in Crimea is silly, but the government in Crimea, in Ukraine, in Kiev, the new one, also said they were willing to negotiate Russia's continued use of the port. So the Russians could have continued to lease out the port, but they wanted permitted access. And so this is like Mélenchon covering for an imperialistic land grab for military reasons. Like it's for military reasons that could have been fulfilled through diplomatic avenues, because they wanted permanent, unrestricted access with no lease. And they also, from Putin's ideological view that he's expressed clearly since then, he believes that Ukraine just belongs to Russia. So this type of Putinist rhetoric from Melson is of concern. The fact that he ever stood with the Russians in invading Crimea should disqualify him from becoming prime minister. But I also am not too concerned about this. And the reason I'm not concerned is I don't think there is anywhere in the world where Macron is going to agree to make Melson prime minister. It's just, there's just no way. It was already difficult enough for Macron to work with forces that he has in the past said like the extreme right and the extreme left are as bad as each other, and he's like attacking them both. It'd be difficult enough to even work with them, but to choose the worst amongst them to be prime minister just because France Unbowed is the largest party, and even if it is the largest party, it's like 77 seats. It's like the largest party of a larger coalition. And like if you were to compare the seats of the centrist party with France Unbowed, the centrists have more seats. There's no way. They're going to have to find some compromise candidate, and that's not going to be Melson. Also, the coalition has already put out a statement rededicating their support for Ukraine. Rededicating, saying, hey, they will continue to support Ukraine, and they stand with them completely and totally against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that's also some positive messaging from the French left coalition. So I don't think that Meloson's like Putinist history is going to be too much of an immediate problem. I do think he'll probably have a larger microphone, and maybe he'll say some things that are not going to be appreciated. Maybe he will try to use his position to try to regurgitate some Putinist talking points. Who knows? Certainly, I would say Putinism has gone a lot more out of style in Europe than it did back in 2014 for both people on the French left, and I mean even somewhat on the right. Point is, though, I don't think it's going to be a major issue due to the beliefs of the wider coalition, due to the beliefs of the centrists, and just Meloson's general divisive position in French politics, I think restricting him from being anywhere close to the prime ministership, even if France Unbowed, his party, is the largest of the left-wing coalition. Oh, I will also say, there's also been some brilliant takes from the big thinkers, TM, about the French elections. Here's David Sachs, known geopolitical expert, saying, France shows that no election is certain. Macron and the far left used every trick in the book to deny Marie Le Pen her victory. Republicans shouldn't get complacent. And then Cat Turd, another geopolitical expert, responded, every trick in the book equals they cheated. At a certain point, this isn't like cool rebel behavior where you're telling the truth or you're truth telling and you're like out there. Not that this was ever truth telling. But you know, you're just like a cool rebel fighting against the establishment, and you know, conservatives are the real counterculture now. This is just pathetic. I don't think it was ever that to begin with, but this is just pathetic. This is you not having enough elections to cope about in the United States after a bad Republican performance in 2014, 2018, 2020, and 2022. And so now you need to go and cope about elections overseas as well. The French centrists do not want the Marine Le Pen's party to be in charge. The French lefts do not want them to be in charge. You put them together, they make up a larger share of not only seats, because both of them are larger than her party in parliament, which is how it's done. I mean, it's, you know, there's an electoral college system in the United States. Donald Trump has lost the popular vote multiple times and still be made president. So if this is a problem for you there in France, it's because they didn't get as many votes as the French far right, then it should also be a problem for you in the United States. But if you put them together, they also got more votes than the French far right. And I mean, if you've got more votes on the left and the centrist than on the far right, then the far right doesn't go into power. Got less votes when you put them together. They got less seats than both parties. They lost the election. And when voters were given a choice between, they can say it's every trick in the book for them to take their candidates off and just have 1v1, one opposition candidate versus Marine Le Pen's candidate, so you don't split the vote. Not splitting the vote isn't cheating. It's electoral strategy. It's completely within the bounds of strategy. Just because when French voters had a choice between a far-right loon and a pretty, also, it could also be somewhat loony left-winger, or boring and stale centrist, or whoever, they chose the loony left-winger or the stale centrist. That's, again, not cheating. That's electoral strategy. But they have to say they cheated because David Sachs came out and said this before the election. Europeans are tired of war. They want their leaders to focus on defending their own borders rather than Ukraine's. Belgium's prime minister has resigned. Sunak and Macron could be gone next month. Zelensky is only around because he canceled elections. Bad news for Biden. This is ignorant on many levels. Number one, the Belgian prime minister is going to be replaced with somebody who is equally pro-Ukraine. And like the government that's coming in is pro-Ukraine as well. Okay, so that's the first thing. So like saying that this has anything to do with Ukraine at all is silly. Sunak was replaced by Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer is as supportive of Ukraine. In fact, within 2 days of him being elected, they were already announcing more weapons to Ukraine, shells and all sorts of stuff. Macron could be gone next month. What's really funny about this statement from David Sachs is he's just wrong. There was no possibility for Macron to be gone. Macron could have gotten zero, his party could have gotten 0 votes. And I do literally mean 0 votes come the second round of the election, and he'd still be president because it wasn't an election for president of France. It was a parliamentary election. Biden could have led the Democrats to the worst election results 2022 had ever seen. That is not going to remove Joe Biden from office. This is the equivalent of somebody trying to come to talk to you about American politics, and they said, wait, Democrats lost the House in 2022, so Joe Biden's no longer president. This is the level of what David Sachs is operating here when it comes to knowledge about Belgian politics, British politics, France politics. And this is the guy that is informing the richest man on the planet, Elon Musk, about foreign policy. Okay? This is the guy. Anyway, I'll ignore the last one because I've already talked about the election stuff in Ukraine a million times. Macron, and if you want to find my position on it, you can probably find it somewhere else. I just don't want to drag this on too long. Macron's party is on track for another epic humiliation. That was his prediction before the results. And that right there is why David Sachs has to say every trick in the book, and the people around him have to say it was cheating. Because if not, then they have to admit that their predictions were wrong. And the last thing they want to do is reflect. I'm streaming by candlelight.